Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar, How Energy Efficiency Can Help Rebuild North Carolina's Economy and Reduce Emissions. So today we will discuss ACEEE's new study on energy efficiency opportunities in North Carolina. And you will hear from North Carolina policymakers and others working in the state. My name is Maggie Molina. I'm Senior Director for Policy at ACEEE and a co-author on the study, and I will be your moderator today. Before our speakers begin, let me know just a few logistics. First, all attendees are currently in listen-only mode. Following all of the speakers' presentations, we will then open up the webinar to questions. So throughout the presentations, while you're listening, please go ahead and type your question into the chat box, and we'll work to address those during the Q&A period at the end of the webinar. Finally, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send a link to registrants after the webinar is over. So now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. So the lineup will be first, thanks Maxine, Rachel Gold, Director of the Utilities Program at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. Then Sushma Masemore, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Environment and the State Energy Office Director with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. Next, we'll hear from Bridget Herring, Energy Program Coordinator with the City of Asheville. And finally, batting cleanup will be Jen Weiss, Senior Policy Associate with the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for your time and your expertise and for your insights on ACEEE's new study. So let's start with our first speaker, who is Rachel Gold. Rachel leads ACEEE's Utilities Program. Her research focuses on state energy efficiency policy, utility regulation and rate making, resource planning, and utility sector energy efficiency programs. Prior to rejoining ACEEE in 2018, Rachel worked at the Rocky Mountain Institute, where she advised public utility commissions and utilities on power sector transformation and led multi-stakeholder collaborations on energy policy. And before that, she served as member of OPower's regulatory team. She holds a Master of Public Policy from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Bachelor of Science from Brandeis University. As I mentioned, Rachel is a lead author of the report, and today she'll present the overall findings and recommendations of the study. So next slide, and over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Maggie. I'm really excited to join you all to launch and share our report today, How Energy Efficiency Can Help Rebuild North Carolina's Economy, an analysis of energy cost and greenhouse gas impacts. As many of you know, North Carolina has seen increasingly severe weather events such as hurricanes and floodings in light of climate change. In addition, North Carolina faces the prospect of a continued recession amid the public health crisis. Many residents struggle to pay energy bills, and many are still out of work. But there's hope. The state's recent Clean Energy Plan, published by the Department of Environmental Quality in 2019, takes a bold step to call for reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, improvements in affordability, and acceleration of the clean energy economy. Our report takes a look at how energy efficiency can be a solution for climate, the clean energy economy, and affordability. Next slide, please. So for this project, we are taking the recent Department of Environmental Quality Clean Energy Plan and the Energy Efficiency Roadmap created by stakeholders and organized by the Nicholas Institute at Duke, and taking some of the key recommendations and work of those stakeholders and analyzing the benefits and costs, energy savings, and greenhouse gas reductions from some priority policies and programs. Our scope is statewide, looking at savings across customers of investor-owned utilities, municipal utilities, and cooperative utilities. We focused in particular on end-use energy efficiency in the electricity sector, and in particular in savings in buildings and industrial sectors. We also took a look to make sure that we were focusing our scope not just on mass market customer programs, but also making sure that the policies and programs that we analyze had equity in mind and were particularly designed to serve underserved communities in North Carolina. This work conducted a top-down analysis of specific policies and programs, leveraging our research from across the country and region, as well as data from North Carolina itself. It's important to note that this was not a potential study, which is the kind of study that starts from the bottom up, but was really designed to serve as a complement to the existing energy efficiency potential studies in the state. Next slide, please. So we took a look at a wide range of policies. We started with policies in the utility sector and in the built environment. Things like an energy efficiency resource standard and targets for municipal utilities and cooperative utilities, codes and benchmarking for buildings, as well as the utility savings initiative. And then took a look at programs and opportunities to create financing mechanisms that can serve as a foundation for efforts in other sectors. We also looked at low-income programs that can ensure the benefits of clean energy get to the customers that need them the most, and at industrial and agricultural customer programs. These can often be some of the most cost-effective savings in the system, and it's really important to ensure that, that there are a broad range of opportunities for them to have their unique needs met and for them to contribute to energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So taking all of those policies together, we analyzed what the energy savings would be. When you take a look at this chart, you can see that the top of the chart shows the projected electricity sales in North Carolina if no new energy efficiency measures were adopted. The bottom of the dark blue shows the electricity sales if all of these programs and policies were adopted. And as you can see, the savings are about a fifth of projected 2040 electricity sales. So we see a pretty significant potential for savings from the policies recommended by stakeholders that we analyzed here. As you can see, some of the biggest drivers of savings are things like an energy efficiency resource standard, that's the dark blue, codes, that's the bright green, and municipal and co-op targets. But it's important to note that some of the other policies really do add up to significant savings when you look at them as a whole. And what's important about them is that they offer a diversity of approaches to complement utility programs and codes. Next slide, please. So we took a look at cost effectiveness from 3 different lenses. We looked at the net present value of these policies and programs, so looking over the life of the energy efficiency measures that are a part of them, including benefits that continue past 2040. So this is a set of policies and programs put into place between 2022 and 2040. And we started with the Program Administrator Cost Test, or Utility Cost Test, which looks at the costs and benefits across the whole utility system. It's a really good comparison for energy efficiency versus other available resources for utilities. And there we found that the benefits exceeded the costs by more than 2 to 1. We also looked from the participant perspective, what would be the benefits for those North Carolina businesses and households that specifically participate in these programs and directly benefit from these policies. There we found even higher benefits, finding a benefit cost ratio of 3.5. And then lastly, we looked at a limited set of societal benefits, specifically some of the benefits of avoided carbon dioxide and some of the health benefits from avoided emissions as well. And as you can see, those range in the billions and are a really significant contributor to some of the benefits associated with energy efficiency. Next slide, please. So the DEQ Clean Energy Plan takes a look at and creates some ambitious targets, including a target to reduce electric power sector emissions by 70% below 2005 levels by 2030 and attain economy-wide carbon neutrality by 2050. So we took a look at how the energy efficiency policies that we outlined here might contribute to that goal. And based on this current statewide forecast, North Carolina is projected to emit about 42 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents in 2030. And those reductions come from things like coal plant retirements, other shifts in generation, some planned energy efficiency. And that leaves an additional 19 million metric tons to reduce. We found that the energy efficiency policies outlined in this report can actually bring the state an additional 11% closer to that 2030 target. And you can see when you take a look at the graph on the right-hand side that the bottom shows what it looks like if we continue existing efforts. The gray shows the energy efficiency case, all of the programs and policies that we analyzed. And as you can see, the savings are about 3 times as high from these policies and programs in 2030, and about 5 times as high if you look at 2040. Next slide, please. So it's really important to note that energy efficiency has a really critical role to play in climate policy in North Carolina. The work in this report is an important first step. It starts from stakeholders' recommendations, and it really focuses on the electricity sector. But it doesn't represent all of the potential for energy efficiency to contribute to climate. There are further electricity savings from more ambitious policies, things like net zero codes or building performance standards. And there are savings from energy efficiency beyond electricity. We could see savings from fossil fuels in buildings and industry, as well as savings from switching fuels, what's sometimes called beneficial electrification. Finally, beyond the building sector, there's transportation, where there's really ample opportunities for greenhouse gas reductions from energy efficiency in transportation, both from switching to more efficient electric vehicles, as well as system efficiency from moves to support transit and reductions in vehicle miles traveled. So based on that, we came up with, and based on our analysis, we came up with a series of 6 recommendations. There's already a great energy efficiency roadmap, so we didn't need to create one of those. Instead, we wanted to boil down our findings to 6 key recommendations. Next slide, please. The first of these is to build on the existing foundation of policies. North Carolina is a regional leader in energy efficiency already, with savings right now really coming from utility programs, weatherization, building codes, and voluntary industrial efforts. If North Carolina maintains present levels and present funding for those efforts, we estimate that these programs will save more than 9,400 gigawatt hours in 2040 and contribute an additional 4% toward North Carolina's 2030 climate goals in the electric power sector. But that's not enough. We know that there's much more potential. So the second recommendation is around leveraging energy efficiency as a tool for job growth. Energy efficiency creates local, sustainable jobs that can really help to contribute to economic revitalization. We know that COVID-19 has hit the state's energy efficiency sector with losses of more than 16,000 jobs this spring. And driving investment in energy efficiency can help get those North Carolinians back to work and can also be a stimulus tool for a broader group of workers. Next, we think it's really important to focus efforts on underserved or newly vulnerable populations. Traditionally, underserved groups, according to the roadmap, include rural customers, low-income customers, families that are renters, as well as agricultural customers and small businesses. And that was before COVID. Now we know that households in the state are behind payment on more than 1.3 million electric, gas, and water utility accounts, and that puts many at risk of eventually having their service disconnected. We think there are opportunities to target energy efficiency efforts to those who are most at risk in this critical time. Next, I'll just talk about some of the newer policies that we think it's important for North Carolina to consider. The first is establishing minimum energy efficiency targets to drive utility sector progress. We recommend shifting these targets for investor-owned utilities from being an optional element of the RPS to being a standalone component. We additionally recommend some changes to reform policies and make it easier for industrial customers to participate in utility programs and to allow for savings from multiple types of fuels in programs, enabling adoption of high efficiency heat pumps for heating and water heating. Lastly, we recommend addressing some barriers to how we value energy efficiency in North Carolina, making sure that we have symmetrical tests that take into account the same benefits as the costs. And lastly, it's really important to future-proof North Carolina's policy environment with advances in both financing and buildings. Financing can serve as the foundation for the savings that we want to see in other sectors. And by enacting robust codes and benchmarking, we can create a foundation in the building sector and ensure that the buildings that we build now that will last for many, many years are built right the first time. So I'll stop there and thank you all for the opportunity to share a bit about our report and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Just a reminder to attendees to please go ahead and use the chat box if you have any questions. And thank you again, Rachel, for that great summary. Also, I would like to thank our co-authors, Andrew Hoffmeister and Charlotte Cohn, on the study. This was very much a team effort, and thank you to the many stakeholders who supported our efforts. So let me next introduce Sushma Masemore. Next slide, please. As a oh, and there's the link to the report, and that's available on our webpage. So let me introduce Sushma Masemore, who was named Deputy Assistant Secretary for Environment in 2018 and State Energy Director in 2019 in North Carolina. She's working to bring clean energy solutions and sustainable practices to North Carolina businesses, citizens, and government operations. For the State Energy Office, she oversees programs related to low-income weatherization assistance, energy planning, energy efficiency, and transportation alternatives. She's also leading statewide initiatives related to climate change impacts, adaptation, and resiliency. She has over 30 years of public and private sector experience related to pollution control and energy systems planning. And for the Division of Air Quality, she managed a team of engineers and scientists to develop air quality rules and state implementation plans. Sushma earned a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and is a licensed professional engineer in North Carolina. Thank you for being here today to share the state's perspective on energy efficiency. I'll turn it over to you now, Sushma. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the ACEEE team for preparing this very timely and useful report for the state of North Carolina to utilize. On behalf of my team and our department, we appreciate for the extra work that went into preparing the report. Next, please. So I'm going to start out with the EO80 that came out in 2018. For those of you that may not know, this executive order was one of the first climate-related actions taken by the administration in almost a decade. It was titled North Carolina's Commitment to Address Climate Change and Transition to a Clean Energy Economy. And amongst three statewide goals it set up for achieving by 2025, the one that we're going to focus today in this next 10 minutes is how we can use energy efficiency to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at 40% levels below the 2005 emission levels. In addition to that, associated with the second goal, which is reducing our building energy consumption in state fleet by 40%, all of these goals are in the world of energy efficiency. And if you're new to the concept of energy efficiency, it's really an important matter in energy planning and carbon reductions because it is an avoided emissions, and the cheapest form of energy is the energy you don't have to generate. Next, please. I'm going to step back a little bit why EO80 established our priority towards climate change. It's on the backdrop of the Paris Agreement, where Governor Cooper signed in the beginning of his administration to become a party to the Climate Alliance states. And this group of 25 bipartisan state governors are committed to addressing climate change by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The goals for all of these states is to reduce emissions by 26 to 28% by 2025. And in support of the EO80 and that Paris Agreement, we have been working with our state partners and other stakeholders to look at a variety of subjects related to climate. One of the reports that was produced in support of that work was from a leading group of scientists from the North Carolina Institute of Climate Studies. and that is this report here called the North Carolina Climate Science Report. It is the first downscaled, geographically specific science report that looks at global state of science, the historical changes in North Carolina, and projected changes in North Carolina. And a key outcome, it's a very long report, lots and lots of information for planners, for businesses and all that. But the key outcome from the report is that North Carolina is in the front line of the impacts of climate change. And what we have seen in the past, especially in the last couple of years, will continue, and we will see large changes in our climate, much larger than any time in our state's history, with a probability of 90 to 100% outcome. And this report also specifies what the impact to daily average temperatures, nightly temperatures, the frequency, intensity of hurricanes, storms, and other events are likely to be for our state. And what's driving all of this is the emissions of greenhouse gas emissions. And it is a stated fact and a proven science that what happens to our emissions profile as a state and as a country and globally will affect our state's temperature, our nation's temperature, and our global temperature. And what you see here are the different temperature ranges expected under the red line is the higher emission scenario, and the green, which is the lower emission scenario. And red is where we as a nation, we as a state are headed towards a more expected outcome. And North Carolina is a big player in the nation's energy economy and globally. We produce as much emissions as the country of Austria and Denmark. We're in the top 10 state with the largest economy, largest energy usage, largest energy generation, and largest energy expenditures. So what we do here matters. And for that reason, I'm gonna focus on our state's priority towards energy system. Next, please. This is an inventory of our greenhouse gas emissions. You may have already seen that. It was produced in 2018. Electricity sector is the primary emitter of GHGs, followed by transportation, industry, and other sectors. We have been a leading reduction state in reducing greenhouse gas emissions through our prior state policies towards the environment and energy. So we are actually pretty close to meeting the Paris Agreement, most likely by 2020 and 2021. Our goal is beyond that. And next, please. What you'll see is places where we have identified energy efficiency opportunities along all of these economic sectors. And if you could just click for a couple seconds. The opportunities range between electricity, transportation, industry. I think the annotation is not working. That's okay. So energy efficiency can be applied in every one of these sectors. And I'll focus mainly on the electricity sector for now. Next, please. And the reason why this is important is, don't worry about all the spaghetti lines here, but what goes in is about 2,500 trillion BTU of energy, fuel resources, and other types of resources. But in reality, our system is inefficient. It's just the laws of thermodynamics, but the way our system is designed, that almost 70% of what goes in is rejected into waste energy. And there's opportunity in the residential, commercial, industrial sectors to become more efficient, to use less, to conserve more, and avoid this rejected portion. And that is the concept behind energy efficiency measures for reducing our emissions, but also for us to be more economically prudent with our resource. Next, please. Next, please. One more. So yeah, if you could just click to the end of the next slide, right here. So as I mentioned, 70% of what goes in is wasted. There are two forms of maximizing the input energy. One is through efficiency, through technology solutions, and this has a direct impact to the customer. in reducing the energy intensity, whether you're a homeowner or you're a business owner, and that translates into cost savings in your production costs or your annual electricity or energy usage costs. But there's also opportunity for managing when this energy is actually used. When you use this energy in a time period that is most conducive for usage, perhaps it's reducing peak load for the power plants or managing that demand around times that is most optimal for the system. These type of demand response programs can help the system as a whole to be more efficient and cheaper. And so when we look at demand side management, it's a combination of efficiency measures, but also time-based rates and other financial incentives that provide an avenue for the customers to be smart users of that energy. Next, please. We have tried to provide an estimate of what our avoided emissions and generation has been through the North Carolina Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard. The EE certificates that are issued through the REPS program allows us to estimate the minimum level of CO2 avoided and the avoided electricity generation. And we report this to the Utilities Commission every year. The latest report that's gone out just last week estimates that North Carolina's SB3 EE program has avoided almost 5.6 million megawatt hours of electricity. That's the amount of energy that was no longer required because of our energy efficiency program. And that's avoided 2.2 million metric tons of CO2. When you combine it on the right table here, combine it with the renewable energy that's generated out of the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard, it's a combined avoided greenhouse gas emissions of about 5 million metric tons. That's 10% of what would have been emitted from our power plants if we did not have our REPS program. And looking out into the future, once House Bill 589 is implemented fully, and if it is implemented the way it is designed, we could see an additional 3 million metric tons of reductions added as a result of the program. In the Clean Energy Plan, we cited that North Carolina is seeing a flatlining of reductions in greenhouse gases and no more efficiency and or renewable energy generation. And so our vision has been to work with the stakeholders to continue our state's path towards a trajectory of decarbonization and more efficient use of our resources. Next, please. And that's what the Clean Energy Plan goals were set up around, building an ability to reduce emissions at 70% below the 2005 levels by 2030 and attain carbon neutrality by 2050. And in order to do this, we're going to have to reform our electricity and energy construct, our regulatory processes. We'll have to modernize our planning and regulatory processes. But we'll also need to look at the economic benefits and opportunities for rural and urban areas of the state. Next, please. So I won't get into all of this, but there are specific recommendation areas, and energy efficiency and beneficial electrification was given a category by itself, but all of the things that I've talked about today and what you'll hear today fall into all of the buckets that are listed here. We had taken Duke University's the Energy Efficiency Roadmap as an excellent work product, and as part of the Clean Energy Plan stakeholder process, we allowed the stakeholders to prioritize those recommendations for short-term addition into the plan. And we are working towards many of those recommendations and implementation, not just ourselves, but entities throughout the state. Next, please. And one of those activities that's underway is looking at the regulatory construct. Currently, we are paying for our electricity based on the amount of kilowatt hour a customer uses. So that throughput is really what drives a utility's profit for an IOU like Duke Energy. And we are working with a group of stakeholders to basically break that link between usage and the revenue a utility collects. And there are models out there to allow this break to occur, but it has to be done smartly and through an open process. Next, please. And one way to do that is if you do break that link, it's called decoupling, revenue decoupling, then you must tie it with some form of a performance metric, either energy efficiency, PIM, performance incentive metric, or some type of a demand response PIM. Together, they go directly through the throughput incentive. And as Rachel mentioned, that by reducing the usage, you really go after the energy system as a whole and the customer benefits. Next, please. And this is my last slide. Along with the regulatory reform work and the carbon decarbonization policy development work that's going on throughout the state, there's a variety of program activities that are occurring. One of it looks at residential access to clean energy and efficient usage of energy. We're also launching a workforce development and a apprenticeship program that was identified in the roadmap as well as the clean energy plan. And we have a work group started to look at the PACE program to address some of the barriers that exist and potentially come up with solutions for the future. So I'm happy to answer questions later. Thank you for your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Sushma. And yes, we'll definitely save 10 minutes at the end for questions. And I had a couple come in, but just another reminder to participants to please go ahead and type in any questions that come up for you in the chat box. So now let's turn next to a city's perspective. And next slide, please. And I will introduce Bridget Herring. Bridget has over 10 years of experience in environmental project management, policy outreach, and education, including initiatives pertaining to carbon reduction strategies, renewables, green building and resource management policies, and national energy code development. As energy program coordinator for the City of Asheville, she measures and monitors carbon emissions for municipal operations and implements strategies to achieve an 80% carbon reduction and 100% renewable goal. She's a member of the North Carolina State Building Code Council and the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network. Welcome, Bridget. Thank you for being here, and let me turn it over to you.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to ACEEE for putting this report together. I think one of the most exciting things from a city's perspective is that we're on the right track. You know, we're putting a lot of effort into advancing energy efficiency and reducing carbon emissions, as I know many other local governments in North Carolina are as well. And so it's exciting to see these recommendations come together where we have action happening on the ground today. So if you want to go to the next slide. One of the recommendations that came out of the report about building upon existing programs was particularly exciting to recognize that we have made some progress in our building codes and the efficiency, and that we need to, if we maintain that we can see some pretty significant savings, as well as building upon the existing utility programs. In Asheville, we have been successful at leveraging a partnership with the county government and the utility to fund some local community partners to really increase enrollment and participation in our existing utility programs, and seeing quite a bit of impact in reduction of overall energy use, as well as some peak demand issues that we were seeing in our region. So excited to see that that recommendation also came through in this report. Next slide. Additionally, you know, the City of Asheville has an 80% carbon reduction goal, and to date we've reached that through efficiency. We've reached that through electrification of vehicles, as you see an electric bus pictured here. And so to see both those policies reflected, as well as encouraging our utilities to reduce their greenhouse gas reductions too, I think similarly with the state, with the utility, with ourselves, we don't always know the path to get to that end goal, but the fact that we're all in it together is comforting, as well as helps push the envelope for each of us. Next slide. And so these are a few maps. I don't know, they might be a little hard to see, but basically the point that we have going through here is, in Asheville, we're very interested in looking at all the stresses that people are dealing with. I think the pandemic has just brought more of this to light. But as you can see, the map furthest to the left with the green on it measures energy burden. So the more red it is, the higher energy burden we're seeing. This is a picture of Asheville and census tracts. Going over to the middle graph talks about percentage of income. So the darker the color, the higher percentage of housing costs are relative to your income. And then the map all the way to the right shows about lack of insurance. So I didn't have the map prepared to share with you today, but we've also overlaid our climate resilience assessment as well as other factors such as redlining, where our BIPOC communities are thriving, and seeing that there's a lot of compounding issues. So the fact that ACEEE kind of brought this to the front to say that we need to be looking at the non-energy benefits of energy efficiency is not something that I think is important for all North Carolinians, but is specifically important to a lot of local governments as we're starting to recognize those compounding factors that are stressing our most vulnerable and frontline communities. Next slide. And so in that area, we are putting in, city resources to expand weatherization programs. We're trying to supplement our local weatherization assistance program, as well as funding additional organizations to kind of do some of this work. We're looking at, affordable housing benefits and redevelopment on city-owned property for multifamily, recognizing that there's a shortage of housing, and how can we incentivize both affordable units as well as energy efficiency or high efficiency units as well. And so it was really nice to see that come through, as that's an effort that is quite challenging for the city, but something that we're spending a lot of time and resource towards. So next slide. And then, talking about, what we're doing in terms of benchmarking. So coming from an organization where we have met our carbon reduction goal to date through energy efficiency efforts, I know that you can't manage what you don't measure. And so, having these benchmarking programs, enabling them to be involved, I think is a good driver, not only for, business owners and building owners, but also for the city to be able to direct our resources to the places where we need it the most. Cities are also uniquely positioned to implement a transparent benchmarking platform, provide technical assistance, recognize the leaders in our community, and help kind of disseminate those lessons learned to each other. And so I think enabling a benchmarking policy in North Carolina could be extremely useful, and that partnership between the state and local governments and the utility to kind of move the needle. But something that will be required for that is, an increase in data access. And I know this report specifically called out a filing that we have at the North Carolina Utilities Commission right now, talking about how can we have easier access to both our own information as well as share that with other folks that are able to leverage that opportunity and turn it into efficiency savings. So glad to see that as well, and an opportunity that's ripe in North Carolina. Next slide. And then of course I would be remiss if I didn't talk about building codes. So as some of you may be aware, in North Carolina, we transitioned from a 6-year cycle, or from a 3-year cycle to a 6-year adoption cycle. So recognizing that we won't be looking at updating our codes until 2024. So I think, to be able to stay with the times, as well as trying to meet these cost-effective building codes that are available, it would be good to return to that, as well as to enable cost recovery for utilities to support code compliance and code education. I know that's available in many other states, and that's something that can also help ease that transition as we move forward into more progressive building codes as they become cost effective and available to our industry. Next slide. So just to wrap up, From our perspective, as I know a number of our other local governments in North Carolina, we're doing this work and we are in a great position to partner with the state, with the utilities to advance the energy efficiency activities in the state. But it will, we have limited resource, as everybody sitting at the table does. And so I think enabling state policies so that we can better partner and align those resources will enable us to really take this to the next level and be able to see some of the savings that ACEEE is recommending are possible for us. And that we really need to lead in equity and recognize that equitable energy efficiency policy benefits all of us. And so while it might be a little out of the box and take us a little bit more time to really dig into that, I think the benefits definitely outweigh the time that takes. So that's my perspective, and I'll pass it back to you, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Bridget. And again, really appreciate you bringing that city perspective and some of those challenges that cities are facing with implementing some of these programs, also some of the great things happening now. So finally, let me turn it to Jennifer Weiss, who's batting cleanup in our great lineup here today. Jennifer is Senior Policy Associate with the Climate and Energy Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions at Duke University. In her work, Jen engages decision makers in the private and public energy sectors, provides information and research on a variety of intersecting renewable energy and energy efficiency practices. She conducts market research, explores financing mechanisms for clean energy, and analyzes the impact of new policies, mandates, and programs on energy projects. In addition to her energy work, she has more than 13 years of consumer and small business banking experience. Jen holds a master's degree in environmental management from Duke University's Nicholas School of the Environment, master's degree in business administration from University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, and a bachelor's degree from the University of California, San Diego. Jen, thank you again for being here, and let me turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Maggie. That always just makes me feel so old when you read all those off. But here we are today. So good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank you for attending the webinar today, and a huge, huge thank you to Maggie, Rachel, and the entire ACEEE team for this wonderful report. I'm really excited to share a few of my reactions to the report and a few key opportunities that I see. So next slide, please, Maxine. So first, a little bit of background. You've heard us talk about the North Carolina EE roadmap quite a bit. As many of you know, and likely many of you on the call today participated in it, back in 2018 and 2019, the Nicholas Institute facilitated a process to look at energy efficiency in the state. We engaged over 100 EE stakeholders. We developed over 100 solutions and came up with a set of 32 final recommendations. I will say this, not all of them had 100% consensus, but they were all heavily discussed. 11 of those, as Sushma has mentioned, made it into the North Carolina Energy Plan, and most were also analyzed in this ACEEE report. So when Maggie and Rachel told me that they would be working on this analysis, I was thrilled, because I know that their work is going to help solidify the role of energy efficiency in North Carolina's clean energy economy. And it most certainly has already, and I hope that it continues to do so. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of great takeaways in this report, and you just heard a whole bunch from both Sushma and Bridget. I want to focus on 4 areas that I think are really, really important and very hot topics. And I'm going to ask the group here to lean in on these. These are things that we can do deeper dives into as a state, and we can really, really move things forward as outlined in ACEEE's report. So we've already mentioned focusing efforts on the underserved and the newly vulnerable, especially during COVID times. These populations need our support. I think discussing, at least, establishing minimum efficiency targets to drive utility sector process, to do a deeper dive into that, I think is important for a state to consider. Of course, given my finance background, I think the financing mechanisms are very, very important to catalyze the investments in energy efficiency. And finally, all of the things that we can do in energy efficiency are tools to drive job growth, and that's really needed right now in the state. So next slide, please. I'm going to just really quickly go into a couple of these areas. Bridget touched on energy burden. Obviously, this is not just something that's in one of our counties. Energy burden affects every single one of our counties. And here's a good just snapshot of it from the North Carolina Housing Coalition. It breaks it between renters and owners, but you can see, especially with the renters, the deeper the orange, the redder the color, that's more people that have a higher energy burden. They are paying more for their energy as a percentage of their household income than average North Carolinians. And so if you go to the next slide, here's another way to look at it. Again, another breakout between renters and homeowners on the left. But if you look at the table on the right, what I want to make sure is very clear is that even if a county itself may not look like the average energy burden is all that bad, when you get into each county, there are people within each county that are spending up to 33% of their income in some cases on energy. When you do that, you're spending on energy, but you might not be spending on food or on healthcare or other needs that you have. And so you add to this the economic stresses of COVID right now, and you have a very concerning problem for many North Carolinians. So investment in EE, particularly the programs that are recommended in the roadmap and in the ACEEE report, can help to reduce these energy bills, lower energy burdens, and provide a lot of economic opportunities like new jobs. Next slide, please. So the second area I wanted to discuss is targets. Rachel shared that an energy efficiency resource standard can be one of the very important components and drivers of energy efficiency savings. But I will note, and from my experience in having these discussions, it is also highly controversial. And so what I would look to North Carolinians today is, let's do a deeper dive into this. Let's work together to come up with a win-win solution. Currently, as Sushma mentioned, energy efficiency can be used on a voluntary basis to meet the REPS requirement. To date, Duke Energy is going up to the maximum 25%. Dominion, last I knew, was about between 3 and 7%, and the co-ops fall around that area as well. I think there's room for improvement there, and one of the things we can do is to broaden the scope of the EE target and to look at it a little bit more holistically, perhaps requiring a minimum target for EE, or perhaps even separating the EERS out from the REPS. But doing this in combination with other things that are going on within the state right now. Sushma mentioned looking at this comprehensive set of utility business model changes, whether it's decoupling or other regulatory changes. How do those two affect each other? When we do a deeper dive into this, I think it's important to include all electric utilities, so the IOUs, the co-ops, and the municipal utilities. I think we definitely need to look at specific targets for low to moderate income households. And we want to look at both EE and demand response when we are thinking about the targets that we develop. Finally, as I mentioned before, I think we should tie these to any proposed regulatory changes that are occurring, including cost effectiveness changes or performance incentive mechanisms that are ongoing at the Commission as we speak. Next slide, please. And last and finally not least, because I know we want to get to questions, I wanted to talk about capitalizing on the financing opportunity. Financing wasn't always specifically called out within the report, but it is loud and clear that it can be a foundation and it can be a catalyst to doing more energy efficiency within the state. So I will just touch upon 3 opportunities that we have in North Carolina to drive additional energy efficiency using creative financing. One is the North Carolina Clean Energy Fund, or a green bank. And this can be used to kind of leverage public dollars that might be limited and attract more private investment into the state to do more energy efficiency. We can, within these green banks, expand access to financing for difficult to reach and underserved populations, in some cases carving out specific investment into those populations to advance energy efficiency there. And finally, in a report that will be released very soon with the Coalition for Green Capital, we found that we can create up to 15,000 new jobs in energy efficiency within the first 5 years if we fund this green bank and we do the programs that we think it can do. Also want to mention commercial property assessed clean energy. This is one of the areas that the Department of Environmental Quality is focused on. This is a voluntary assessment on a property tax bill. And for commercial customers, this is very interesting to them because it gives them financing. So this isn't a direct loan, it's actually something that they can use as an operating cost. And so this becomes very attractive to them. So that's a very good tool to look into for North Carolina. And then finally, on-bill programs, which is a utility bill used as a repayment mechanism, working with the utilities, with the co-ops, and hopefully in some cases the IOUs, the municipal utilities, to offer these programs. I will say one of the keys to on-bill tariff programs is that it can expand financing to renters and credit-constrained borrowers, where sometimes a loan product might not be. And so that it's interesting, especially when you go back to those maps I showed you of energy burden. In the renters specifically, we want to be sure that we are meeting their needs and helping them to finance what they need to finance for energy efficiency. With that, I'm going to leave it there. I think all of these can help to advance energy efficiency opportunities in North Carolina. I'm really looking forward to leaning in and discussing these more, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you again to all of our speakers for taking the time to share your expertise this afternoon. So thank you, and let's go to the next slide. I think that will be a good one to hold up there as we handle some questions that we're getting in. So first, got a question about if the slides would be available afterward. We will send out to all registrants a link to the webinar and slides. So one question that came in, it was specific to Orange County, but I think it could be a question applied in general. And that's noting that in Orange County, they're asking for proposals for our climate action tax funds. What, given where North Carolina is, do you think is the best bang for the buck for energy savings and assisting disadvantaged communities? So let me ask that to the whole panel. I don't know if there was Sushma, that might be something you might be interested in, or Bridget from the local perspective. There's one other general question that I will just note right now, because I think you might be able to answer it kind of at the same time. And it was a general question about, are there state incentive programs available for energy efficiency in disadvantaged communities? And of course, there are some of those programs. So it's kind of a twofer, but I thought could be taken at the same time. Does anyone want to start? And we can kind of open it up as a panel mode at this point for a Q&A.
I mean, I can jump in on that from Asheville's perspective. When we looked at energy burden, we also did some modeling. Well, first we looked at what was driving our energy demand and did do some load profile information. And I think, that might be specific to Buncombe County, but I'm sure that there's some resources available, especially with Duke's IRP coming out, that might have some more information about the Triangle area that they might be able to leverage. But we did some modeling to see, kind of what had the biggest bang for the buck on energy burden and could have that impact. And they were rated from, replacing HVAC equipment, especially minimizing, on those cold mornings, going back to that electric resistance heat, so minimizing that backup heating option. Other things that came in very high were duct sealing and insulating, smart thermostats, adding insulation, especially attic insulation, and then LED lights kind of came in down at the bottom. So those were the things that were identified in our area that I would assume would be probably similar in Orange County as well, but that there might be some more local resources available.
This is
Yeah,
Sushma.
and Jen, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jen. Thank you.
No, I was just going to add to what Bridget said. I 100% agree with the HVAC, especially now that North Carolina is being considered a winter peaking, which means in the mornings is when a lot of our energy use is being used. I think looking at the HVAC as well as water heaters and what you can do to make those more efficient. I wanted to add on to this, and this isn't exactly energy efficiency, but something to consider. And Sushma's probably going to bring up the funding, the WAP funding, the weatherization funding that her office gives out. One of the things that is happening is that the repairs sometimes need to be made to homes before the weatherization can occur. And so oftentimes we can't use the weatherization program funding that Sushma's office has until those repairs are done. So something to consider is how do we weave in funding for those repairs so that we can also do the weatherization at the same time.
Yeah, I'll add, but what Jen and Bridget said is really true. This is we could spend over an hour minimum talking about the subject. But Jen is right that the deferred homes that are unable to be weatherized have some really structural issues, whether it be a hole in the roof or a hole in the floor. Those things cannot be weatherized until those fundamental parts of of a house are fixed. So those homes never get to a state where they can be cost efficient and the homeowner is able to reduce their bills and be able to be comfortable. The subject of affordability is really a big one in North Carolina, just like every other state. 15% of our population is under the federal poverty line. And if you look at the data, where 30 to 60% of their income can go into not just electricity, but other types of fuel, whether it's natural gas or propane. So there are lots of discussions around it, and one of the most recent ones has been related to the latest Duke Energy's rate case that they filed. If you have time, take a look at what the conversation around affordability is. The commission is going to be launching a stakeholder activity, possibly if they agree to the recommendations from the public staff to address energy affordability. Perhaps that's going to result in, more targeted discussion and the inequity that exists, and when they try to pass on system costs to all residential, all commercial, and all industrial customers. And as this dialogue gets more broadened, it's a time for local governments and the community groups to be engaged on how best to devise that conversation around the folks that pay the most for energy out of their income.
Thank you all. Wanted to bring Rachel into the discussion here too. There's a specific question about health impacts and asking to learn a bit more about how the study quantified some of those non-energy benefits, which can be challenging to do. But Rachel, you want to share a bit more about how we quantified those health impacts?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking that question. So what we did is we used a tool that the Environmental Protection Agency produces called the AVERT tool. Unfortunately, I can't remember what the acronym stands for. But what that does is models the emissions reductions associated with both energy efficiency and renewable energy. In this case, we looked at energy efficiency. Across the Southeast region. And what you're able to do is use that tool to project out forward. And what we did is we used the information in the integrated resource plan to project out and look over time at the benefits. So that's how we figured out what the avoided emissions looked like. And then we used another tool called COBRA, which translates those benefits into things like the PM 2.5. And I'll give a shout out to Charlotte Cohn and our team who led this analysis. But that tool enables us to make an estimate of what the potential health benefits would be, and also what the monetary benefits associated with those avoided health impacts are.
Rachel, one thing I'd like to add on the COBRA results is that I think they're mainly health benefits from PM reductions, particulate matter, especially fine particulate matter. I don't think they account for any toxic pollutant reductions and carbon reductions into the health benefits.
That's my understanding as well, Sushma, and it's important to note further that there are additional health benefits associated with indoor health and indoor air quality associated with what happens in the buildings themselves. This is looking at the emissions much more broadly.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for one question, and I hesitate to ask this because it's not an easy answer, but it's an important one. So at least to tee up and maybe just some very brief comments. What have you found to be the best way to get rental property owners to invest in energy efficiency? And I know, again, there's a lot of market barriers for the rental housing, but any just really rapid fire thoughts on what the state is doing, opportunities there?
This is Sushma. I would say,
Jen. Oh.
Go ahead, Jen.
Oh, you go.
I would right now say, this is really a market that needs to be explored, but Jen mentioned the property assessed clean energy, commercial and rental markets that could utilize financing mechanisms to achieve cost savings could be a good opportunity to look into. Just throw that out for everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Sushma.
Yeah, and I would just add that it's really important to have the buy-in from the landlords, right? And I think that's what Sushma was referring to. If we can find a win-win solution that the landlords will appreciate and benefit from, that will also benefit the renters. And so I think CPACE can definitely do that, as well as probably some on-bill programs as well.
Great. Thank you for entertaining a very challenging question as we're wrapping up. So with that, we are at the hour. Thank you again for participating, to all of our speakers. Thank you to those who logged in to listen. And again, we will follow up with some more information with a recording and slides. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.